everyone, today I'm going to show you how to create light rays in Photoshop using two different methods. The first method that we're going to do will be using the existing light in our images to create the light rays. And then the next method will be to create and use our own brush for a dual purpose. That'll be for light rays and also to add in dappled light. So let's go ahead and have a look at our PSD. Everyone should have 3 layers here. This one is where we're going to create from the existing light some new light rays in here. This is just a tree that we're going to use for the dappled light brush, and I did just leave this layer on here in case anyone wants to use it, and I'll show you how in a minute, but we will be I'll show you how to create your own with a tree silhouette like that. We're going to start with the layer labeled practice here, and we're going to go to select and color range. And I know you guys have seen me use color range a lot for actual color selections, but today we're going to use it for highlights. So you just want to click in the select box and choose highlights. And you can play around with your range and your fuzziness. You want a good selection of the light, but you don't want too much because it can confuse the next step that we're going to do. So something like this should work, and I'll click OK. And then once you have that selection, you're just going to make a copy, Control or Command J. And if I turn off the practice file here, you can see that highlight selection that we have made. We're going to go ahead and convert this to a smart filter, and then we're going to go to Filter, Blur, and Radial Blur. And you guys have seen me use this method for creating light rays inside of windows and things like that. It's basically the same thing that we're going to do today. So the important thing is this box here. As you can see, we have a center point here. So we just want to make sure that it at least lines up in the general direction that our light is going in the image. So I'll place mine somewhere about here. Now the only bad thing is that sometimes, because you can't preview this, you may have to do this step a couple times. So what you would do is just click OK, and then if it's not quite in the right position, you'll have to go back and kind of move it and tweak it a little bit more. So for me, actually, I think I'll move mine just a little bit. So I'm just going to do Control or Command Z to go back. I'll go back into my, not motion blur, although that could work too, but I like this method better. Let's go back to our radial blur, and I'm just going to tweak it a little and then click OK. And that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is set that to screen blend mode. And if yours is not showing up quite enough, you can always make a copy. I think I want a little bit more down here. So I'm going to keep that copy, but I'm going to put a mask on it. And with a soft black brush, I'm just going to take off this part. And I think I'll do the same thing here, but I'm not going to take off quite so much, but I think I will just lower the flow and just remove a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and merge these, and I'll put it back into screen blend mode. So Control or Command E is how you merge them. Put that back into screen, and then I'm going to lower the flow and opacity because we want these edges to be a little bit softer and not quite so opaque. So we'll just do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and blur this a little. I'll just use Gaussian blur. And another thing you can do that I don't necessarily need to do in this image, but if you right click over here, you can bring up the blend if, which can be really helpful if yours is kind of sticking out a little too much. It's not quite blended in. You'll just hold down the Alt or Option key to split these controls apart. And as you can see, it'll help fade it from certain areas. So maybe if you have too much in the highlighted areas, or you don't want it showing up quite as much in the shadow areas, then you can play around with these sliders and that'll help that. And then another thing that I like to do sometimes, and this is just something I just do for fun, but sometimes I'll make a copy and set the blend mode to dissolve and then just lower the opacity down. And then if you see, that'll add kind of like a little bit of a dust effect in there. I just think that's a fun little addition sometimes to add. And another thing that you can do is just come back down to the light ray layer, and you can change the color tone if you feel that maybe it's just not matching up with your image, or you want a fantasy color into your light ray there. I find that hue saturation works the best, so I'll just go ahead and clip this down, and you can just move the slider around. As you can see, I'll bring up the saturation. You can get different color tone effects in there, and that can be fun to play around with as well. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off all of these layers, and we'll go to our next method. So for this one, you're just going to need a tree silhouette, and you can create your own silhouette out of trees as well. I have several silhouette tutorials if you need to watch that, but I did provide one here for you guys to use today. So what you're going to do is just get your lasso tool, and I'm going to change my feathering to about 2 pixels. And then you're going to take that and just grab a selection. You want to make sure that you're staying on the black though. Try not to cross through into the white. And you can create several different brushes by just selecting different areas from your tree or whatever you're using. Make a copy, turn that off. Now you need a solid background behind this to create the brush. And when we're creating the brush, we want the parts that we want to show up to be black, and the parts that we don't want to show up, we want to be white. So for this particular part here, I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bigger actually first, and then we're going to invert it, and that will switch our black and white. So Control or Command I, and now I'll put a white solid color layer underneath. And then we can just merge those two together. And you can go to Edit and Define Brush Preset. Name it whatever you like, and then click OK. And as I said, I did leave this one here for you. If you want to use that, it's up to you. I'll go ahead and turn my practice file back on. I'm just going to actually delete everything that we've used and we don't need. Then I'm going to create a solid color layer, and I think I'll just choose something like bright and warm, maybe like this. Go ahead and invert it. Now I want my light to be a little flatter, so I'm just going to move my brush like this. Go ahead and bring up my opacity and flow. And I'll just go ahead and go like that. Now, before I use this for the dappled light, actually, let me just make a copy, and I'll turn one of them off. So this one's going to be for our light ray. So I'm going to go ahead and right click over here and rasterize the layer. And then I'm going to apply the layer mask. I'm going to convert this to a smart filter. And I'll go ahead and move this one over here, and then we'll go back to our radial blur. Me make a couple copies so it shows up better. I'll go ahead and merge those copies all together and set that to screen. And I'm going to go ahead and do that radial blur one more time. I'm going to add a little bit of motion blur as well. Just make sure your direction again is going in the same direction as the light source. And maybe one more radial blur just to make it a little longer. Now with these you can also move them, you can warp them, you can liquefy, anything you like. So I think I'm gonna go to my distort. And I'm just going to make a few little adjustments. And then I'll go to my warp, and I'm going to just drag this out a bit. Then I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to my blend if. Once you have that tweaked how you like, just go ahead and click OK. You can also clip a brightness and contrast to these as well if you want to brighten them up to make them more noticeable or darken them a little. I'm going to remove a little bit of contrast. Go ahead and merge that together, put it back to screen, and then again, don't forget that you can add your color adjustments to that if you like. Let's go back to our dapple light here. So for this, we're going to change the blend mode to overlay, and then I'll go ahead and blur it a little. And then again, just use your blend if you would like to blend in any of those highlights and shadows. I really love this dappled light step. It can make such a huge difference in your images when they have this sort of lighting in them. I'm going to go ahead and turn this light ray back on, and I'm going to warm it up a little, but I want a bit more of a dramatic effect. So what I need to do is put a solid black color layer underneath and just merge them together. And then I'll set that blend mode to screen. And I think for this one, I'll just clip a warming filter to it. Maybe something like that. And then I'm going to merge that, and whenever you merge layers, you always have to put it back into the blend mode that you want, and maybe just do a little more blend if on this one. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and group this, and so I kept mine pretty subtle, but you guys can definitely really make this more dramatic, especially if you have some super dramatic lighting in your image. I hope these little tips help you to take your lighting to the next level in your composites. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and thanks for watching.